What's up, guys? So, second episode that I'm making today, we're going to be talking about the Blue Eye Samurai, specifically episode 5. And the reason being is because I think this is the most important episode in the entire series. The first part of the series, in my mind, was a masterpiece. It was incredible flow, everything, the storyline, the characters, the artwork, and it all worked so well together. And then there was kind of this point where it just didn't flow so well in my mind, and that was episode 5. And there are a few reasons I think that's the case. So let's dive in. All right, so the first thing we're gonna be looking at, by the way, I made this beautiful flow chart. It had been about a year since I've seen it, so I had a general idea. I had to go back and make some notes and just recall what exactly is going on in this episode. Because there's a lot going on. There's a lot. It's intertwining, there's layers to it. I rolled up my sleeves because it's about to get real. So let's dive in. Initially in the start, Mizu is in this brothel, and it's being attacked by the Thousand Claw gang. She is almost single-handedly taking them on throughout the brothel, and she's hiding, then she's coming out and fighting and killing, and then she's hiding again, and she's trying to keep Akimi. Okay, by the way, I'm gonna pronounce a ton of names wrong. I apologize. Names are not my thing. I'm bad at remembering them. I'm bad at pronouncing them. But anyway, Mizu is trying to get everyone safely out of the brothel that is being attacked by this Thousand Claws gang. In between these fight scenes, there are flashbacks to her past, and it reveals a lot about why she is the way that she is. So we'll dive into that a little bit more. Right now, I'll just stick to the summary, but basically, she reunites with her opium-addicted mother, and then her mother arranges this marriage between her and a disgraced samurai who is living a peaceful, secluded, hermit-esque life on a farm. And they start to develop feelings for each other. Bro's got Riz, a little bit of Riz. He likes her because she's different. She's not like the typical woman in Edo period Japan. And one thing with this episode that's crucial, and I think is why it was very jarring to me the first time I watched it, but it's very crucial to keep the cultural context in mind as you're watching it. They develop this strong relationship. It builds throughout the episode, in between these fights in the brothel with the Thousand Claws gang. And not to mention, there's this puppet show that parallels Mizu's story. And it's completely separate. It's folklore, it's some little puppets, but it really parallels what she's going through. And I see why they threw that in there and why there's these 3 main strings of storyline that is followed throughout the episode. And in the puppet show, the Ronin falls in love, but ends up killing his family. Classic tale, classic tragedy. Guess what? Pretty much the same thing happens here. So there's this scene where Mizu and Mikio, so Mikio's the samurai, they're at this tree that it was like a representation of their love. It was this big, beautiful tree, and it was peaceful, and it seemed for a second Mizu was going to escape this vengeful quest that she was on, this life of trying to hunt down her biological father because he created her. She viewed herself as a monster because everyone else viewed her as a monster. But then she meets this guy who doesn't treat her like that, doesn't view her like that. Until they spar. And scabbards are on, no harm. But they have a little spar, a little tussle. And Mikio enters this. And remember, again, keep the cultural context in mind. That is so, so important for this pivotal episode. Because if you don't, you'll end up like me the first time I watched it, where I was just like, what? Because, let me finish. So they spar, and essentially what happens is Mizu takes him to school. He just completely owns him. She is the wind, he is a rock. He's not even a big rock, he's a pebble. And she just flows around him. She picks him up, carries him away. The spar ends with her on top. And actually she did pull her blade out of the sheath and has it up to his throat, but it's in this kind of sexual, flirtatious way, and then she leans down and kisses him. All right. He didn't like, I mean, some guys would like that. He didn't really like it at that moment, at that time, because this is Edo period Japan. He's a fallen, or not fallen, but disgraced samurai, honors everything. His fighting prowess, his skills, that's everything to him. That's his purpose, that's his meaning. He looks at her, and again, this is where the animators did this incredible job with capturing the visceral facial expressions and the raw emotions of the show. And he looks at her, and you can tell that he sees her for the first time the way that the world sees her, as a monster. And he says as much. He says, "You really are a monster." And then he storms off. So if that felt kind of whoa, out of nowhere to you, I agree. And we're going to dive into that. But the way this episode ends is, so we know the Ronin kills his whole family. The Mizu basically returns to the house. Bounty hunters, they come trying looking for her, so she got sold out. And there's a question of whether it was her mother who's smoking opium again. And for a time had given that up during this period where it looked like everything was going to be okay and that she'd escaped this violent life. Her mother gave up the opium, and then it all came crashing down. And that's the true tragedy of it, is that Mizu almost escaped, her mother almost escaped, Mikio almost had his happy ending, and then no one did. And essentially, Mizu fights the soldiers or the bounty hunters that come for her. She fights them by herself. Her mother doesn't go help. She doesn't go grab a weapon, nothing like that. And then Mikio rides up on a hill, and he had been gone. He rides up on a hill, sees her, and then turns around and rides away. She defeats all the guards, Mizu does, and then at the end, Mikio shows up and his sword is unsheathed, and he claims that he was coming to help her. And he knows he's no match for her, right? So it's questionable, for sure. Maybe he had been going to get a weapon. I don't recall if he had a weapon when he was riding away. There's some possible explanations there, but it seems pretty clear that he was the one who sold her out. And her mother says as much. He ends up stabbing the mother. So the mother's dead. He turns and is like, hey, please, give me another chance. And Mizu doesn't. She kills him with a throwing knife and then walks away. Tears, blood, crazy scene. So they're all dead. Meanwhile, fast forward to the present day. She defeats the Thousand Claw Gang by herself, basically. She gets a little bit of help, here and there by Ringo and Kimmy and others, Akimi. But basically the theme of this ride is that she's doing it all on her own. And so she defeats the Thousand Claw Gang and escapes the brothel. And that's how the episode ends. So now we're going to break it down here. First off, the layers, right? We've got the Ronin, we've got past Mizu, we've got present Mizu, we've got this context and this reason behind why she's on this completely focused single track path, this one way in her mind to live, and that is to seek out the white devils and kill them, because they could be her father. And specifically, she's looking for her father. She's looking for the man who's responsible for her existence, because she hates herself, essentially, views herself as a monster, and wants to eradicate that. And that's because of external influence, because of everyone telling her that. And the incredible bit, though, there that I do want to point out is that through all the external hate, she doesn't give up. She still fights. So let's talk about some of the issues I had initially watching this. For me, first off, it was jarring when Mikio betrayed her like that. What I think they should have done, looking back at it, is I don't necessarily disagree with it. I think his actions actually make sense considering Edo period Japan. However, there's, in my mind, was this contradiction in, like, he fell in love with her because she was different, but this was just too different, it seemed, or is what the writers were telling us. And that is plausible, but what I think they should have done is not immediately just jump to that spar session and have that been like this nuclear bomb that blew up what they had going, because they built up the relationship that whole episode, and it was this beautiful, slow, falling in love storyline. So what I think they should have done is had other moments where Mizu was just a little too different, or introduced other tension points or conflict that all climaxed in this sparring session. She just came alive. That's who she is. That's her nature as a warrior. And for him, it was too much. It was, as a very, very proud man, it was too much to handle. He breaks and then goes and sells her out. Now, it could be, too, that the writers were thinking, well, he never actually did. It was her mother. Her mother did it for the money for the opium. Considering all that, it was still just, it was a lot. It was a lot that they were packing in this episode. They also had that third tier, or let's say first tier, whatever you want to call it, this other layer that is the story of the Ronin. I think it did a lot for the helping the pacing and the switching between the past and the present. That might have been too much if they had just been doing the past and the present. The transitions were just a little bit smoother thanks to that puppet show that is the Ronin folklore, that is a parallel of Mizu's own life. So I think that was a really brilliant tactic that they used because it didn't take up too much time in the actual episodes. It didn't detract at all. And I think it really helped with the transition. So they used it like a tool. Now, looking at the present Mizu, I actually did have an issue with this as well. And it was more from a storytelling format, which is up until episode 5, the Blue-Eyed Samurai was completely believable. Everything about it, from her fighting style to her upbringing, everything about it. She's light, she's quick, she's fast, she's skilled. It all makes sense. Gosh, when she takes off the iron gauntlets, right, that were weighing her down, slowing her down a little bit, and you're just like, whoa, that's so cool. So in episode 5, she basically gets pinned under this heavy door, which, by the way, if you've ever picked up a door, they're freaking heavy. So she's under this heavy door, and I mean, I don't know. We can speculate about how much she weighs. She looks light and thin, and that's part of who she is. She's a warrior, she's quick, she's fast, right? We've established that. She's under this heavy door. There's a bunch of the Thousand Claw Gang piled on top. So it is protecting her. I do wonder if one of them might have gotten to the side. So she's on the ground. This heavy door is on her. I wonder if one of them came to the side and poked a spear at her or something. Or maybe one of them, they've got their little claw things. They just stick it under the door. I don't know. Somehow she gets from under that door. And they didn't even need to include it. Like that's part of it to me. That's where it just seemed like the writing became a little more disjointed from episode 5 onward. And we'll get to that in other episodes, some of the issues I had there. But I maintain that episode 1 through 4 was an absolute masterpiece. So going back to the door, Mizu escapes it, which is fine, but very questionable. My thought is that episodes 1 through 4, you can confidently say it. Episode 5 onward, and again, masterpiece, right? It's arbitrary. But I felt like the writing, the pacing, it all struggled a little bit from episode 5 onward. So we're gonna keep diving into that, but was worth looking at from a storytelling perspective. And what they did admirable, the positives, right, was the layering, the transitions, the way that they floated between her past and her present, the violence and the peace, the duality of this episode. It was all beautiful. What they did not so great, the meh, was the sudden switch with Mikio. It just felt like, I think it makes sense, again, considering the cultural norms and whatnot. But if you're not familiar with Edo period Japan, which I'm not. For me, a first-time watcher, it was just kind of, he's gonna betray her like that? The dude seemed legit. And so if there had been other hints or other moments or scenes, I think those would have been worth adding in to build up to that sparring session. And the other negative point that I'd make too is just that this is where the fighting and some of the action starts to break down and not be as believable. There's gonna be more of that in future episodes. Those were my gripes, and the gripes really only started with episode 5, which is why I wanted to look at it. So thank you. If you like this video, please like and subscribe.